Chains, Chapter 36. Lady Seymour was struck by a fever whilst visiting up in Greenwich. She had to be carried to her bedchamber, her skin the color of an old beeswax candle. Dr. Dusage came to bleed her so that her body humors would go back into balance. When the bleeding was over, Madame saw the doctor to the door. I was dusting the grandfather clock in the front hall. Good sir, Madame said in a low voice, I wonder. I believe our aunt would recover faster at our estate in Charleston. Could she sit in the sun, or she could sit in the sun for hours and breathe healthful air. Don't you agree? The doctor's bushy eyebrows flew up in alarm. South Carolina is hundreds of miles from here. Over bad roads, Lady Seymour would be dead by Philadelphia, which was likely Madame's intention, I thought. The doctor pulled up his gloves and picked up his bag. I doubt she'll be well enough to travel until the spring. I will call again tomorrow. He tipped his hat. Good day, madam. Lady Seymour's bell rang upstairs, and the door closed behind him. Madame squeezed her lips together so tight I thought she might bite them off. Girl, she spat, go see what she wants. By supper, it had been decided that I would tend to Lady Seymour while she was bedridden. The master used his connections in the British High Command to secure extra firewood for the house, declaring that his aunt's bedchamber be kept as warm as the month of June. The heat in the room helped me to bake out the fever in Lady Seymour's blood and ease her cough. 'Twas warm enough that I could go about in stocking feet, which was a comfort, for my shoes had taken to pinch my toes something wicked. As she recovered, the lady took to reading all of the newspapers printed in the city. Whenever she dropped off to sleep, I would steal as many sentences as I could. Thusly, I followed the progress of the war, what was left of it. The flame of independence was sputtering and expected to burn out any day. The rebels had run out of ammunition, soldiers, and money. Mayor Matthews, him who plotted to kill General Washington, escaped from the rebel prison and returned to New York in triumph. The American Congress, frightened by marching British, fled to Philadelphia and ran to Baltimore. Newport, in my home state of Rhode Island, fell to the British too. When I read that last bit of news, I was stunned. I had not spared a thought for Rhode Island for months, till several days before I could again sneak up to the bridewell, toting sausages, crusts, and cheese rinds. The guard stole a few of the sausages and gave me only a few moments to conversate. It mattered not. Curzon was not feeling up to much talk. I sat on the stone floor and checked the hole of his leg. It was hot, but free of yellow pus. Conditions in the prisons had eased some. Folks in town had donated enough blankets that there were one to be shared between every 2 or 3 men. The British promised each prisoner would receive 2 pounds of pork and hardtack biscuits every week. They did not announce that the pork was often spoiled, nor that the men had to eat it raw, for there was no fire to cook it over. For my next visit, I saved my own helping of mince pie. I filled the bucket with potato scraps and mutton fat, put the pie on top. The guard took the pie, as I had hoped. I love a good mince pie, he said, as he unlocked the door to the prison. Pie crumbs spilling from his mouth. Frozen bodies were stacked in the hall, waiting to be buried into the pits. The clothes had been taken from their bodies to give to living soldiers to keep warm. I kept my eyes on the ground, out of modesty. Curzon was still not in the mood for conversating, not even a little bit. I thought he looked feverish, but when I went to feel his forehead, he pushed my hand away. The men snickered at that. I took my empty bucket and I left. Snow fell that night. Lady Seymour prepared an errand list for me the next afternoon. She had spent the morning gazing into the fire and had not taken any food. I made a bold suggestion that she eat a biscuit with honey for her own good. You need strength to get through the winter, I added. She set down her pen and picked up her teacup and sipped the hot cinnamon water. I thought it pleased you when I left so much on my plate. Ma'am, the more I leave behind, the more there is for you to take to the prison. She studied me so close I thought she could see my thoughts. That's what you've been doing, is taking the table scraps, isn't it? My head bobbed once, like a puppet's. Am I to assume that you know someone who's confined there? I found my voice. Yes, ma'am. She sipped again and looked at me over the rim of her teacup. It's honorable to help a friend in need. How did you know? I blurted out. She folded the sheet of paper on the table. These are the items I would like you to fetch for me. Purchase the ink and the newspaper at Rivington's, but not the books. He overcharges. Go to that shop near the baker on Hanover Square. A lie who said they haven't closed. I bobbed once and took the paper. Please, ma'am, I tried. How did you know? Her gaze returned to the logs in the hearth. Take care how you go, Isabel. Many people think it's a fine Christian thing to do to help the prisoners, but I do not think my niece is one of them. Yes, ma'am, I whispered. It started to snow whilst I was in Riverton's. The wind blew the snow direct into my face as I crossed the square, and I was grateful to step into the shelter of the stationer's stone, for 'twas warm and dry inside, near peaceful, if such a word can be used to describe a shop. A jelly-bellied officer with thick spectacles was purchasing a tall stack of books from the man behind the counter. They were deep in their talk and appeared not to even notice me. I took a slow turn around the shop, admiring the shelves heavy with books, business forms, proclamations from Parliament, and General Howe, slates, thick paper, quills, and sealing wax. The books called to me. My fingers itched to touch them. It had been months since I dug into the story of Robinson Crusoe. I glanced toward the counter. The men were arguing friendly-like about a fellow named Hume. They both had their faces planted in the same pamphlet. When I trod on a squeaky board, they did not even look up. I reached up to the bookshelf and flipped my way through the books, standing at attention. The titles were near as long as the books themselves: Treatise on the Propagation of Sheep, the Manufacture of Wool, and the Cultivation and Manufacture of Flax, by John Wiley, or Cato Major, or his Discourse of Old Age, with the explanatory notes, by M.T. Cicero, or Poems on Various Subjects, Religious and Moral, by Phillis Wheatley, and countless tracts containing sermons and advice. My fingers backed up. Mama told me about Miss Wheatley. She was kidnapped in Africa, sold in Boston, and wrote fancy poetry that smart people liked. She had visited London and England. She had been an enslaved girl, but was a free woman. I took the slim book off the shelf and opened the cover. I had never read a poem. What if I lacked the skill? What if I were never caught? Or what if I were caught? Might as well throw myself into the river. Bang. The closing door startled me, so I dropped the volume. I quickly set it back on the shelf and approached the counter. Can I help you? The young man who stood behind it. Yes, please, sir. I handed in a list. From Lady Seymour. I hear she's been poorly, he said as he looked over the list. Yes, sir, but she's strong enough to sit by the fire now, and she has a powerful urge to read. He nodded. She's a good customer. I'm glad she's on the mend. He quickly assembled everything on the list. The letters of Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, History of the Roman Republic, Volume 1, and The Expedition of Humphrey Clinker, and pulled out a large sheet of paper to wrap them in. As he worked the scissors, he paused. You knew that boy, didn't you? Pardon me? He continued cutting. Bellingham's boy, red hat, quick talker. He creased the paper with his finger. He brought you here once in May, pointed you out the window, convinced me to hand over two baked fresh rolls, told me that you were going to die from hunger if I didn't help. He smiled at the memory. I'm sorry, he said, or I'm sorry, sir, I said. I didn't mean to take your food. He pulled off a length of twine. You didn't. One of the advantages of courting the baker's daughter is all the bread one man can eat. He had not yet commented on me looking at the books. I feared he might try and trip me up and get me to say something I ought not to, but I saw no other choice than to be polite. I hope your lady is well, sir, I said. He concentrated on tying the bow. So do I. She fled with her father to a village in Pennsylvania, a place called Hatboro. They make cats there. Clever, don't you think? He tried to smile, but his eyes were downcast and melancholy. Perhaps 'tis safer there, I said. Aye, he said, finishing the bow, with plenty of young men eager to protect her, but that's a tale for another day. He kept the package in his hands, lost in thought. Master Lockton will settle Anne's account at the end of the week, I said. Oh, aye. He gave me the package and waited as I settled it into my basket. I hear tell you're one of them who feeds the lads in the bridewell. A sizzling log on the hearth suddenly popped suddenly, and I jumped. Not me, sir, begging pardon, but someone is mistaken. He crossed his arms over his chest and shook his head. That mark on your face makes you pretty hard to forget, lass. The heat from the hearth filled the room and made it hard to breathe. My eyes darted for the windows, and I fought the urge to run. I felt like all of New York was watching me. He leaned forward and put his elbows on the counter and lowered his voice, though we were the only people in the shop. You tell them boys in jail to hang on. There's plenty of us out here trying to help. Sir, he removed a slim volume from under the counter. This is for you. Don't let your mistress see it. I can't read, sir, I lied. He snorted once as he quickly wrapped the book. Of course you can't. He pushed the package to my side of the counter. who are all who love liberty should commit to the words at heart. I can't take it. I cannot pay. I only have a few left, and those I should burn, he said, with a wave of his hand. Read it and pass it on. Keep feeding the lads. I bobbed once and hid the parcel in my pocket under my apron. As soon as I could stand close enough to a fire, I'd get rid of it. The last thing I needed was more trouble on the account of independence. Yes, sir, I said, hurrying to the door. Thank you, sir. He raised his fingers to his lips in a last warning. Shh.